Today on What's That About, a special interview episode. We are pleased to have back Marc McGovern, a city council member and current Vice Mayor of Cambridge. We've asked him to come on to talk about the new multifamily zoning changes winding their way through the council's legislative process. Thanks for coming back on the show, Marc.
Yeah, oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Great. First of all, before we get into some of the details, can you tell me why you think it's important to change the current zoning laws in Cambridge? As you're one of the primary sponsors of the zoning changes, correct?
It really started out of the housing committee with Councilor Azim and Councilor Siddiqui, who are the chairs,
Okay.
the co-chairs. I am on the housing committee as well, so I've been involved with it, from the start. But certainly when it comes to housing and zoning, I'm typically one of the lead sponsors.
Okay. And yeah, so why is it important to you to change this the zoning?
Yeah. Well, I like a lot of people in Cambridge, I tend to believe that we have a housing shortage, not just in Cambridge, but in the region. Um, and if you have a housing shortage, you deal with that by building more housing. And right now, so there are a few reasons. I mean, where this sort of grew out of originally, and this is a conversation that sort of started several years ago, is this whole idea around exclusionary zoning. And by that we mean that, when zoning first came into play 100 years ago, um, the idea made a lot of sense, right? It was a lot of environmental kind of impacts. You don't want the meat packing plant next to the school, right? And so cities, fought for the right to zone as they felt appropriate for their communities. And so Cambridge was one of those cities, and so the zoning really initially started as sort of more around let's put the commercial in over here, and then residential over here. Very, very quickly, that turned into um, a way to segregate people. And at the beginning, people were pretty explicit about it, like we're going to put immigrants and people of color over here and make these areas more expensive. Supreme Court eventually stepped in and said you can't do that. But what cities did, and Cambridge, but it's not just Cambridge, said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to zone based on, we're going to call certain neighborhoods more desirable and other neighborhoods less desirable. And in the less desirable neighborhoods, we're going to put most of the commercial and industry. We're going to put more of the density. We're going to put more of the cheaper housing.
Mhm.
You could build, more units on smaller lots, so that people are more, congested. And then in other neighborhoods, we're going to say you can build one housing structure on a huge lot, right? Which so that people get big backyards and big front yards. And if you look at the way Cambridge is laid out today, although we don't do it that way anymore, really, the foundation of our current zoning is really based on that racist and classist history.
Mhm.
And so, east of Harvard Square looks really different than west of Harvard Square. And so we've been talking about, we none of us were around 100 years ago or, 60 years ago, but we're around today. And then, do we have a responsibility to, deconstruct that racist history? And I think we do. So that was kind of the foundation of this conversation going back a few years. So right now in Cambridge, you have certain neighborhoods where you can build multifamily housing, and you have other neighborhoods where you can't, right? And so we thought that that should be dismantled, and you should be able to build multifamily housing everywhere in the city, by right. Um, and it's not really out of place because it's not like there's a neighborhood in Cambridge that doesn't have multifamily housing. So, this has sort of changed over time, and so it's not like, you know, it's a little different, right? It's not like we're asking to build something that doesn't already exist in places. So anyway, so that was kind of the foundation. The other part of it is obviously wanting to increase the number of units, affordable as well as market rate, right? We have a lot of people in this city who, um, earn too much money to qualify for any of our subsidized housing programs, but are still paying, 30, 40, 50% of their income on rent. Um, so they won't qualify for any help, but they don't earn enough to make their housing affordable, which is paying less than 30% of your income on rent. Um, so, how do we build more of that housing for those folks as well? And then you add to that just sort of developers, what you're seeing in a lot of places now, and I can give you examples where a developer will buy a triple decker, knock it down, and what is more financially beneficial to them is to build a larger single family home
Yeah.
on that lot and sell it for $3 million than it is to build another triple decker. So
Yeah.
you're seeing these sort of multiple unit buildings getting knocked down being replaced with single families. Um, and that's a problem. So if you believe that developers are profit driven and you don't want them doing that, then you have to make it more profitable for them to do what you want them to do. And so we need to change the zoning to make it more profitable for them to build more units if that's what we want.
Yeah. And I've seen, just on my street, there's been like 3 buildings. They haven't replaced, they'll like gut all the internal, you know, apartments and then just keep the shell so they don't have to go into the, up rezoning and just build, spend all this money to build the same number of apartments that will cost like 3 times as much as they were before the building was renovated.
Right. And that's, I mean, unfortunately, whatever, we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit about the different plans that are on the table.
Yep.
I mean, unfortunately, that's going to happen no matter what we do, right? Because, a lot of these triple deckers are, they're older, you certainly can't charge high rents for a lot of them because you need to gut them and make them more high end if you're going to do that. Um, Land costs are so expensive that's what developers have to do in order to recoup their investment and make a profit. Um, so I think unfortunately, you're to see a lot of that. But the question for me is, if someone knocks down a triple decker, would I rather they replace that triple decker with a 4 or 5 story building, or would I rather them replace that with a single family? And I'd rather have the more units.
Yeah. So I know the ordinance committee just yesterday recommended 2 different options to the council. And before we get into those details, what has been the process to get this far, to get those laws passed into Cambridge, just so maybe our viewers will understand what's going on right now?
Sure. So this really started out in the housing committee, as I mentioned, and Councilor Siddiqui and Azim put forward some thoughts around ways that we can sort of deal with building more units and making it easier to build more units and reducing some of the zoning barriers to building more units across the city. So that got talked about for a number of meetings in the housing committee. And basically, the housing committee then asked the community development department, CDD, to draft a plan, draft some zoning language, which they did. And uh, they came back, to the housing committee. The housing committee then moved the conversation to the ordinance committee. So the housing committee is only 5 members. The ordinance committee is all 9. So as a member of the housing committee, we thought, okay, it's now time to move this to the ordinance committee where all 9 members can participate in the conversation. Once you do that, once something goes to ordinance, it starts a clock by state law that you have 90 days, you have 60, I think it's 65 days to schedule the first meeting. And then once you schedule that first meeting, you have 90 days after that to do something with the ordinance, pass it, don't pass it, whatever. So it went to the ordinance committee. We've now had, I think, 5 or 6 ordinance committee meetings on this topic. We have community development has done a number of community meetings in the community with people about this. There was a citywide mailing that went out telling people about this. Different councilors have had public meetings. I've had a few. I know Councilor Toner's had a few. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot written about it in Cambridge Day and in other places. online and listservs. So there's been a lot of sort of outreach. I mean, we've certainly gotten, well over 1,000 plus emails, both with people who are concerned about it and with people who support it. Um, and what I said at the beginning of this conversation, not our conversation, but this process was, I've never seen an ordinance like this come out the same way it went in, right? That's what the community process is for. So the original ordinance
Hmm.
called for 6-story buildings as of right anywhere in the city.
Right.
It did not it did not require, if you built a 6-story building, it did not require that any of those units be affordable, right? So someone could we have something called inclusionary zoning that kicks in at 10 units or 10,000 square feet, and 20% of the units have to be affordable. People got concerned that somebody might build a 6-story, 9-unit building
Hmm.
and, have no affordable. CDD recommended getting rid of rear and side setbacks so that you can build closer to the property line. Um, there were uh, there was the lot size requirement was much smaller so that you could build housing, a 6-story building on a much smaller lot, which concerned a lot of people. So anyway, we kind of went back and forth and debated, and there are two sort of options that have kind of come out of that conversation. One is the 4+2, and one is the 3+3. Um, and we have forwarded the ordinance that we forwarded out of committee. Was it not yesterday, the day before? I guess it's all blurry now. Was
Yeah.
the 4+2 model, and what that would allow is 4 stories, roughly 45 feet, as of right, anywhere in the city, and then an additional 2 stories, so it can go up to 6, but only if 20% of the units are affordable.
Okay.
And then we put the rear and side setbacks back in. We put in a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet so that you can't jam a 6-story building on a tiny lot. So we really did a lot to try and um, ease the concerns that a lot of people had, but
Mhm.
not so much that we undercut the ultimate goal, which is to allow more housing to be built across the city. So I think we're in a pretty good spot. I'm not thrilled with all of it. I would like to see more. I was happy with the 6 stories
Yeah.
everywhere, but the votes weren't there for that, and there was a lot of community pushback on that. So we've tried to thread this needle, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it.
I know we talked originally about the 6 stories by right. Did for clarity for me, so every building that's above 4 stories has to have 5,000 square feet or of land, or is it any building?
For the six-story buildings have to be the 5,000 square feet. So you can get 4 stories on a smaller lot.
Okay. And the setbacks are the same as they are currently?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like 2.5 feet, 5 feet in the rear, 10 feet in the front.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so what are the next steps for so it's just the 4x2 that passed. It wasn't the 3x3 that was not sent
Right.
to the main
And
council.
the four, and sometimes you hear them say it's referenced as 3+3+3, but the
Mhm.
last three is really the last three pertains to the affordable housing overlay,
Mhm.
and that's the same in both versions. If the base zoning goes down to 45 feet or lower, the AHO, the affordable housing developers, they can go to 9 stories,
Right.
and that's true in either version. So that's kind of,
Yeah.
that's the same. The real difference, and both in the 3+3 and the 4+2, both require 20% affordable housing in the 6-story if they go to 6 story. So the only difference really between those two is one allows 4 stories as of right and one allows 3 stories as of right. So that's what went forward. I know that there are some of my colleagues that are still interested in the 3+3, and they may bring back an amendment at a future meeting to vote
Okay.
on that, and we'll have that discussion. So the process now is, now that we moved it out of the ordinance committee, it'll appear on the next city council regular meeting, which
Mhm.
is the 27th, because Monday's a holiday.
Yep.
So we come back on the 27th. We then and amendments can come in, then there's public comments, at city council meetings. Um, we then have to take a vote on the 27th whether to forward the ordinance to a second reading. So when you do when you're changing zoning, you have to take two votes. So there's a first reading and a second reading. So we'll do the first vote on the 27th, assuming that passes, and we'll vote to send it to a second reading. The way a second reading works is it actually has to sit on the agenda for 2 weeks before you can vote it. So the 27th, we'll vote the first reading. The next council meeting, um, we won't do anything with it. We can't take any action on it. And then after that, we can vote to either pass it or not pass it, or we can just do nothing, and it would expire at that point in February. So we're getting close. There's still a few weeks, but we're getting pretty close, and it's been a pretty long process with, again, a lot of community input, and um, a lot of compromises and changes that have been made. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, hopefully no one's going to try to say this time that sometimes comes up, oh, we haven't had enough community involvement. This is being done without. I mean, I feel like this has been all over the news and locally anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's when people don't like something, the
Mhm.
first thing that they tend to do is weaponize the process,
Yeah.
and when we did the rezoning in Volpe and Kendall Square,
Mhm.
um, it was like 56 meetings, I think, between council meetings, ordinance meetings, community meetings, public meetings. And the people who liked it at the beginning still liked it. The people who didn't like it at the beginning still didn't like it. And
Yeah.
the people who didn't like it were saying there's not enough process. So I don't, would 56 meetings have been enough? Would 58 meetings be enough? Like, I don't, at some point you get to the point of we're sort of having the same conversation over and over and over again at this point. And I'm just really not sure that more time is going to really change anybody's point of view. So
Yeah.
at some point you got to do it. You got to make a decision and move on, however that decision comes out.
A process question for me. Can a council member still use their charter right and like postpone the decision for another thing, or is that not in
Yeah,
play?
um, they, I don't believe they can. It's a little murky. I don't believe they can because this is not new business. Um, so I mean, I'll double check that, but I think we're fine on that.
Okay.
Um, where I worry a little bit more, if there's a counselor that wants to delay this, or um, first of all, for anybody other than the charter right, for anybody to do anything, they got to get the votes to do it. So you can make amendments and offer amendments literally right up until the final vote. So we could get to that second reading, that last vote, right, where we have to do something or it's going to expire. And a counselor could say, oh, I want to bring in this amendment that says, whatever. Um, that person would need to get the votes, you know, to
Yeah.
pass it. But it is a strategy that some folks have used over the years to say, oh, see, we shouldn't vote this tonight because there are all these outstanding questions, or I still need all this this additional information. But I don't, I'm hopeful. I think we'll see some amendments on the 27th, and I think hopefully that'll be it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, presumably, since all council members were in the ordinance committee, that would have been a good time to bring that up, those questions up.
Right. Right. And as the person, I'm co-chair of the ordinance committee, but I've chaired a lot of these meetings. I was strongly encouraging my colleagues to, get these amendments on the table as fast as possible, and as early as possible, so that we can actually debate them in a reasonable way.
Okay. If you got a little bit more time, I posted
Yeah, as
on
much time as you need.
Great. I posted on Reddit and just asked people if they had any additional questions, and some of them came up with some interesting or some things that I'd like to ask. The original 6x6 CDD said that they predicted about 5,000 new units, 4,880 new units. with 920 affordable by 2040. And I think they're saying about 4,500 with the 4x2 plan. Has the city run any number? And I mean, this is probably not, the city expects only about 350 new units to be built by 2040 if there's no changes to zoning. Has the city done anything on like the 3x3 that was proposed? And it sounds like it'll come up again in an amendment. At least there'll be a chance of it. Have you heard
Yeah,
numbers with that?
yeah. So they presented that at the last meeting. I don't have the I don't have the most recent proposal in front of me. Um, the so they ran numbers on a couple different scenarios. One was the 4+2 without the 5,000 square foot lot size requirement. One was the 4+2 with the 5,000 square feet, and then the 3+3.
Okay.
Um, so there are some differences. I mean, the more restrictions the more restrictions you put on this, on zoning, then it obviously has an impact on what can be built. I mean, part of the reason for doing this was to kind of free it up a little bit. And we do, similar to the AHO, if a developer is building something as of right, they don't have to get special permit, permission, or variance. And that's been a sticking point. There are some folks who say, no, we want all of these projects to go to the planning board and get planning board approval, or to the BZA and get zoning approval. Um, and what that often leads to is either a downsizing of the project, because people say, I don't want 6 stories, I want four, or three. Um, Sometimes it leads to lawsuits, where, because those are the planning board and the BZA decisions are binding, and so if they make a certain decision and grant a special permit, abutters can sue, which delays projects. Sometimes it leads to projects not even going, you know, people not even wanting to do it at all. There's a house directly across the street from mine, where I live, that was a 2 story building. They could build four, up to four. They could have built, if they wanted to, they could have built six, but they would have needed special permit permission to do that. And they just didn't want to go through that. They didn't want to fight the neighbors. They didn't want to go through that process. So they just built what they were allowed to build. So that's been a bone of contention for some folks. Um, so anyway, but in both versions, the 4+2 and the 3+3, where you can build it as of right, as long as you stay within the zoning, what zoning allows, you can build it as of right. So, the numbers are a little bit different. I mean, the other part of this is that these are all estimates, and I said this at the meeting yesterday. Everybody wants an exact number, right? How many, what is this going to produce, and where is it going to be produced, and but there's so many variables. I mean, the reason the other piece of this was our Envision Cambridge process, where the housing portion of that said that we needed to build 12,500 new units of housing by 2030. And that came out in December 2019.
Yeah.
COVID hit,
Yeah.
right? So when that study came out, the market was good. Things were kind of going along. 12,500 units in 10 years didn't seem like an unreasonable, it was bold, but it wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
COVID hits, everything goes to shit. Interest rates are, through the roof now. Construction rates are through the roof. Um, you know, that, so we don't, there's so many variables that go into it, that these are all just ballpark estimates. And,
Yeah.
we might exceed them and do it in a shorter period of time if things really get better, or it might take a long time. You're not seeing much housing being built now, really. And there are a lot of projects that were permitted a while ago that are just stalled because interest rates are up. So, it's not perfect. And I said it, at the meeting, I said, if people are looking for exact numbers, you can't give them, because there's just too many things involved.
Yeah. In the event, so say this passes 4x2 or whatever passes, um, does the city, is there some measure, or is this just going to be done naturally? The city is going to collect data, and will you try to make adjustments if, say, oh, we're not building as expected, we only got like 100 houses built or whatever?
Yeah. So what we added, one of the other amendments that we added, and we do this for the AHO as well, is we're going to get yearly reports from the city,
Okay.
that will include, how many units have been permitted, how many units have been built. Um, we're going to try as best we can to look at displacement, and is this leading to people being displaced? So we're going to get yearly updates, and then we're going to get a much more comprehensive review every 5 years. So, every year we'll get a sort of a snapshot of what happened in that year. And then every 5 years, it'll be a little deeper analysis so that, if there is something that, that we need to change. I mean, you know, when I was saying that people want exact numbers, they also want all kinds of guarantees.
Okay.
And until you do something, you don't really know, right? Like you do your best, you do your due diligence, you try to avoid unintended consequences. But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, whether you're starting a preschool program or whatever, until you get going, you don't really know. Things that you think weren't going to be a problem turn out to be a problem. Things you think that you figured out, or that that you figured out turned out to be problematic, right? So we'll keep evaluating, we'll keep looking at it, we'll adjust it as we need to. I think just the big debate is that there are a lot of people in the city who feel like we Cambridge has done enough in terms of building housing. We build more of it than most other communities. That we can never build enough housing to meet the demand. Therefore, we just shouldn't build anymore. Um, you know, I don't know if we can build enough to meet the demand. I think the demand is probably pretty high. I know that not building housing isn't the answer, right? I know that less housing doesn't bring prices down, it only drives them up. And if we can build enough where, we're never going to go back to the days where a single one bedroom was 700 bucks a month like it was in 1975. Like that's not going to happen. But could we go from a one bedroom being $3,300 a month to 3,000 or 2,800? Yeah, we might be able to do that. Um, but as long as Cambridge stays a incredibly, vibrant, great place to live, people are going to want to live here.
Yeah.
Um, and so we need to build more housing to help accommodate that. And the rental prices is one piece of it, but there's also other benefits to building more housing in the city. I talk about our small businesses. I got my dry cleaner who's, on Mass Ave in Central Square.
Mhm.
Nobody is driving from Lexington to go to this dry cleaner on Mass Ave, but 2,000 more people living in Central Square,
Yeah.
a number of whom are going to need dry cleaning, will go to him. He's the only dry cleaner in Central Square.
Right.
Or we'll order pizza from ABC Pizza, or we'll go to Tuscanini's, or visit our restaurants. It'll help with the environment, right? There's 80,000 people roughly that come in to Kendall Square every day. If more of those people could live in Cambridge and they don't have to drive for hours, they don't have to look for parking, they can ride a bike, they can take the public transportation, they can walk. That's better for the environment too. Our school enrollment is down. We're closing a school because declining enrollment. More kids in our schools, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
More neighbors, right? So, I think there's a lot of things that are beneficial to having more housing that aren't necessarily just about supply and demand.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're preaching the choir here.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
So I've read places and people have complained online about stuff like this that in the inclusionary requirement, so for 6 stories, well, can actually keep units from being built because it can cost the developer more money to build that housing. And
Mhm.
someone posted about the online about the Portland plan that I don't know if you're familiar with this, but what it basically does is it pays contractors for the difference via a tax break for the difference between an inclusionary housing and the market housing. Kind of gives them a break to build more housing. Have you talked about that in your council discussions? Something similar to that? Um,
We haven't really talked about tax breaks. I don't, the the laws in every state are different,
mhm,
right? So, I mean, even if you look at back for an example, when we were having a discussion years ago about, um, I was leading this effort with Councilor Mazin at the time about trying to raise the minimum wage in Cambridge, and
mhm,
because they had done that in Seattle and in other places, and what what we found out is that Massachusetts doesn't allow cities to do that. You can
Yeah.
do that in Washington, and in Washington State and other places. Couldn't do it in Massachusetts. So when we get into tax breaks and things like that, Massachusetts is pretty strict. So I'm not even sure. I'm not so familiar with the plan that I can say for certain. But I know when we've talked about tax breaks for other things, we typically get told we can't do it without state approval, and the state never allows cities to to do that. So I don't know for sure. But the thing with the 20%, so the inclusionary zoning percentage used to be 11.5%, and
Mhm.
we raised it to 20. And when we did what's called a nexus study, and it shows a nexus between if someone's building market rent housing, um, what does that do to the affordability in the city? And so that's the connection that we make to legally um, allow inclusionary zoning for us to have inclusionary zoning. And when that came out, it said, and this is going back 6 years, maybe 6 or 7 years, it said um, basically in perfect market conditions, you can do 20% affordable. And we got a couple projects when conditions were good. We have not had projects in a number of years at 20% because it just doesn't pencil out financially. And so, one thing we're going to have to think about is, do you politically, it's a third rail, right? I mean, any counselor who's going to come in and say, I want to lower the percentage of affordable housing that a for-profit developer has to produce, that
Right.
person's going to get, you know, I mean, that person's going to get fried, right? The question we got to ask ourselves, 20% of nothing is nothing.
Right.
15% or whatever, 18% or whatever the number turns out to be that would allow housing to be built. I'd rather have 18% with housing being built than 20% and no housing being built. But that's a tough political conversation to have.
Mhm.
I mean, we have people asking us to go to 33% inclusionary. You'd never get anything built, right? So we could do that. We could say 80%. We could pick any number we want if we don't actually care about the units being built. But if you want the units built, you've got to figure out a way that it pencils out. Otherwise, developers aren't going to build them. So I'm less concerned about looking like we're the good progressive, we're screwing those developers 80%,
Yeah.
if it's not going to create a unit for people, right? So we have to figure out where that balance is. That's a tough conversation that we're going to have at some point.
Well, I'll send you that link to the Portland, Oregon
Yeah,
plan,
please do.
because it seems to make a lot of sense to me. It kind of takes away the excuse, oh, we're not building 20% housing because we can't afford it. Not that it's an excuse. I mean, I understand the market is real.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if we
I mean,
could.
the other part people forget with the inclusionary is it's subsidized in perpetuity, right? So you
Mhm.
have the initial cost. So it costs about $900,000 to build a unit in Cambridge.
Mhm.
Okay. So not only is the developer paying, close to $1 million a unit, right? What we require in Cambridge, unlike Boston, is Boston allows the developer to either write a check and buy their way out of creating the affordable units. They can put the affordable units in another neighborhood. They don't have to be on site. You see how this with the Seaport,
Yeah.
right? The Seaport never would have happened in Cambridge because we would have required 20% of those units to be affordable. They would have had to have been on site.
Mhm.
Um, and we require that the affordable units be equally distributed throughout the building. No
Okay.
poor
No.
floors.
Yeah.
So if you're a developer, not only do you pay for the development of the unit, but you could have somebody they pay 30% of their income on rent. So maybe they're paying $1,000 a month, and they could be on the 15th floor in a building in Kendall with this gorgeous view of Boston that a developer could get $8,000 a month for.
Mhm.
That's $7,000 difference. The developer eats that every month in perpetuity. So this is 1,500 units of affordable housing under inclusionary at $900,000 a unit plus the monthly subsidy. You're talking about billions of dollars in affordable housing that developers pay for. It's not any of our tax money. That's free housing
Mhm.
that the city never would have been able to build on its own. So, and 40% of the people who live in those units are people who have housing vouchers. So you're talking people really at the lowest income level, right?
Yeah.
They're there are income guidelines, but 40% of the people make less than that. So it's providing some deeply affordable housing as well as some more, affordable to moderate. Um, so it's been a hugely successful program.
Mhm. Let's get into so people, a lot of people don't want to build anything more, right? Like, I mean, some people say we're doing everything we can, we've got a perfect town, we don't want to build more houses. Are there, what are the legitimate concerns? I mean, you basically can't do much about, let's call them NIMBYs that don't want to build anything, right? Like that they're just going to fight you on process. They're going to fight you on everything. What are some of the legitimate concerns you see or have seen that you try to take into account when you're working on this zoning process?
Yeah. I mean, look, I try to be, I'm a social worker. I try to put my social worker clinical hat on. I try not to be judgmental of people or, or what have you. I mean, you definitely have some people who are, you know, their pictures in the dictionary next to NIMBY and they just don't want anything, right? But most people aren't really like that. I mean, they have concerns. They have concerns that, my brother-in-law who lives and my sister who live on Magoon Street in North Cambridge.
Mhm.
They own a two-family house. Um, both of them are really pro-housing. They don't, they're not, concerned so much about height and whatnot. But when we were talking about the 6 stories, they said to me, look, we live on this tiny one-way street. We
Mhm.
just put solar panels. The city wants us to, they want us to go green. We invested all this money. We put these solar panels on. If you put a 6 story building right next to our 2 story building that blocks out our solar panels, like they're like, we'll live, like it's not going to ruin our life, but like, yeah, that would kind of suck,
Yeah, yeah,
So I get that. Like I'm sympathetic I understand that. Um, what I told them was I get it, but at the end of the day, um, you know, those of us, especially homeowners, we have it pretty good in the city, right? And our property taxes are not percentage wise are not a lot, right? Our bills,
they're
you
too
know,
low. Our property taxes are too low. Yeah. Mhm.
I mean, it's an but it's an interesting thing. Like, so I live in a condo. I think my property taxes are around $8,000 or $9,000 a year,
Mhm.
which is a lot lower than what if I had this same square footage in Belmont or Arlington or some other place because our percentages are lower.
And the
But I
residential
mean,
expansion, yeah,
that's not a little bit of money, right? I mean, that's, for just your average, my wife and I, we would qualify for affordable housing in Cambridge.
yeah,
We don't earn, like, we're not starving, obviously, but we're not like, I don't have $1 million in the bank, right? So if my property taxes went from $8,000 a year to $16,000 a year, I couldn't afford that,
sure,
right?
yeah,
I'd have to move. So, and I'd be fine because I have a condo that I could sell for a good amount of money and I'd land somewhere. I wouldn't be homeless, but I'd have to leave here,
yeah.
right? So I get that, right? But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I was talking to a woman the other day who was very upset about this zoning, and I asked her, she lives in Cambridgeport, and I asked her how much she paid for her house in the 70s when she moved here. She
Yeah,
paid $18,000.
yeah,
It's assessed at 1.3 million. You're doing okay, at the end of the day. And if somebody builds a 4 story or a 6 story building on your street, your property values aren't really going to go down. I
no.
mean, they never go down. And you can put a nuclear power plant next to my house. My property taxes aren't going, my assessment's not going down.
Well, there's that one
Um,
down Mass Ave. There's a nuclear power plant.
yeah. So, isn't it the risk? If you're talking about community and being a strong community, I sort of think that community takes care of each other. And those of us who are better off
Mhm.
and are more stable should give a little more for the folks who aren't, right? So, the concerns are like, it's going to make my street look different, right? It's going to change the character of my street. Those arguments don't sway me at all because cities grow and change all the time. I live in a neighborhood that was literally underwater. I live in the Riverside neighborhood.
Mhm.
I mean, the Charles River used to be a lot wider than it is now. And at some point, the city said, we need a new neighborhood. We're growing. And they, dammed the Charles River and they filled it in and they did what they did. And I'm sure that the people who lived here at the time who had riverfront property, probably bitched and moaned about that too, right? But it had to be done. There was a time when triple deckers were illegal, right? And people said the same thing about triple deckers. They're too tall, they don't fit in, who's going to be living there? They're ugly, my street's going to look different. Now triple deckers are the types of housing everyone's fighting to keep. So,
Right.
I don't, that stuff doesn't do it for me. So, but those are the complaints you hear. It's a building's not going to look the same. It's going to lower my property values. My neighborhood's going to look different. Um,
Traffic.
some people are as bold to say, I don't want low income people in my neighborhood. But those few and far between. Most people don't feel that way. Um, so the folks life is pretty good in Cambridge, especially for property owners, right? And when you talk about doing something that's going to change what someone might be used to, or what they, change we're not Detroit or Flint, Michigan, where people are clamoring for redevelopment, right? People are pretty happy here. And so they're resistant to change because they're happy, you know? So, but it's for the greater good, right? And it's to make the city viable for the future, not just the present. And hopefully people can understand that, look, I may not love a 6-story building on my street, and maybe I think it's ugly, but if that's going to house more people and we're going to get some affordable units out of that, you know, I can live with that, right? And hopefully people will realize that. And we get so caught up in these discussions, and they get caught up 75 feet versus 73 feet versus 65 feet, should the setback in what housing people, right? Like there shouldn't be a lot of controversy around helping to provide places for people to live. Like, and, and we eventually get there. It's messy, but we get there.
Has there been anything in the process that that surprised you? Has there been any like unexpected support or unexpected pushback? Anything that you couldn't have predicted, say in the summer when this kind of started up?
Short answer, no.
Hmm.
I've been through so many of these zoning conversations at this point. They
Yeah,
all play out. They play out the same way. Half the people come in and say, this is great, we should do it. Half the people come in and say, don't do it. Um, a lot of times it's the very same people. I mean, I know, when I hear someone's name get called for public comment, 90% of the time I could tell if they're going to be in favor of it or not in favor of it. Um, and so, this all works out. We go through this process, and there's a lot of heavy debate, and it's emotional, and people get really worked up on either side. We make some compromises. We try to sort of, come up with something that, most people can feel good about. And not everybody, people don't get everything that they want, but they get a lot of what they want.
yeah,
Um, and then and then we vote it up or down. So no, it's not surprising. This is kind of the way all of these go.
yeah. Um, the the push to build bigger in the squares and corridors, the zoning in squares and corridors, does that have any impact of what this going on here?
So, yes and no. I mean, this is citywide zoning, so it includes corridors as well as residential. But a lot of the squares and corridors are going through their own individual, separate processes. So we're doing a North Mass app. So we already did Alewife, like we rezoned the Alewife area
Right.
to allow more height and a mixed, sort of like a mixed neighborhood, commercial, retail, housing. Sort of North Mass Ave is being discussed. Central Square is being discussed. We just finished a plan for uh, Cambridge Street, um, to allow more height along Cambridge Street. Um, we're doing the Central Square lot study. So the city owns a number of properties in Central Square. So
Yeah.
we have the Central Square rezoning, which is really Mass Ave,
Right.
essentially. And then we have the lot study. A lot of those lots are not directly on Mass Ave. They're on like Bishop Allen Drive or Pleasant Street. So now we're looking at those individual lots. and saying, what more can we do on what the city already owns? I mean, the biggest price tag to any of this is land cost. So
Right.
if we could build more on land we already own,
Right.
it's a cheaper project, which means it's easier. You can build more units. It's
Okay.
easier to finance. So so that process is happening too. So there's multiple conversations um, around zoning that are going on right now.
Okay. Um, well, I think that's about all I have right now. Do you have any?
No, I talk your ear off every time you get me on here. I'm
Oh, I
sorry, but it's
appreciate
it's
it.
it's complicated stuff, right? I mean, I wish there were easy answers to all this, and I certainly don't. It's a hard process, and I certainly don't relish in half the city being pissed off at me for something. It's not fun.
Sure.
But this is what we sign up for as counselors, and it's part of the work, and it's an honor to be at the table making these decisions. And um, again, I think we've done on this. I think we've done. There are people that are upset that we went away from the 6 stories as of right because they really like that. There are some
Yeah.
people who are upset that we're entertaining 4 stories. Someone's always going to be not thrilled, right? And most of the city is zoned for 35 feet already for
Yeah.
residential. We're talking about going to 45 feet, like 10 extra feet for more housing on your street. Like, is that really going to ruin your life? Really? Like, of all the things I worry about, being a father and a husband and a son and my own personal health and future. The fact that 3 6-story buildings have been built on my street since the time I was born is probably 450th on my list of things that I actually worry about.
Yeah.
I've lived through this on my own street. It's not the end of the world. You get used to it. The next generation, my kids, they don't know that those 6-story buildings never didn't exist when I was a kid. They've existed their whole life. So the character of their street hasn't changed.
Right.
That's what vibrant cities do. They grow, evolve, they're living things. And that's a good thing, right? It's better than being a city that's dying.
Yeah. And the point, I mean, your kids is a good point because hopefully they will be able to afford a place to live in Cambridge, which is,
I hope so. I hope so. And it's tough because, again, Cambridge is really desirable, right? And,
yeah.
we can stop investing in infrastructure, we can stop investing in our schools, public safety, we can, kick out all the companies in Kendall Square and, you know, we can make this city into stop replacing our water pipes and so we can drink lead water like in Flint, Michigan, and we can make our city an undesirable place. That'll bring prices down.
Yeah.
I don't think people want to do that. So, you do the best you can.
So do you have any predictions about what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks here on this? Do you think, I mean, it passed
Um,
out of the ordinance committee, so you think,
yeah, I mean, the only thing anything is possible.
yeah,
Certainly when you're talking about votes and elections and, things like that, people's votes can change. It came out of 8 members of the ordinance committee voted in favor, one
right,
voted against.
right,
The person, Councilor Zuzi, who voted against I would imagine she's going to continue to vote against it.
cool.
Um, some people will bring up the 3+3 I would assume at the next meeting. There'll be a vote on that. If that goes through, then I'm sure it'll go through to the final stages. If it doesn't go through and we stay with the 4+2, then my guess is that the votes will be there for that unless, 3 people decide that they've changed their mind. And, I mean, God knows, I've seen stranger things.
Yeah.
So I don't assume anything at this point.
Do you think, so people in support of 4 point, this is not a campaign thing, but is the council people on the fence, are they going to be impacted by people calling them now and emailing? And I mean, does the council still need to hear from supporters?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it hurts, I think, I don't think, I know I don't, and I don't think most of my colleagues sort of, it's not like we keep a tally. We might keep a tally to see, where, things are swaying, but it's not like if I get 500 emails in against it, I'm going to switch my vote.
Mhm.
Um, but it does give you a little perspective on sort of how people are feeling and um, that people support whatever position, that they have. So I wouldn't, I certainly would encourage people, that's part of the community process too.
Yeah.
I would encourage people, no matter how they feel about it, to email us. Um, but I think, you might see some things where, someone might bring in an amendment. Let's say somebody brings in an amendment that says, there was an amendment that instead of 30% open space, it should be 40%,
Mhm.
right? That amendment didn't carry, but, someone could bring it in again and they might say, this is a deal breaker for me, right? Like I'm not voting in favor of this at the end of the day because, I'm drawing a line in the sand for whatever.
Mhm.
So just because they voted it in ordinance doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote for it in the end.
Right.
But I think most of us have tried really hard to compromise and to, I keep using that phrase, but thread that needle,
Mhm.
um, to, and realize that we're not going to get everything, that we want. And, some people use that as a way out, right? They say, well, I filed 5 amendments and you only passed 4 of them, so now I'm not going to vote for it.
Right.
I don't know how constructive that is. I don't assume I'm going to get everything that I want in anything that I do, right? So, um, hopefully, you know, people will be more reasonable about it and we'll get something done.
All right. Well, consider this my email to you saying I support the most zoning, most stories you can get passed. All
Yeah. Yeah. Duly noted.
right, great. All right. Well, thanks for your time, Mark, for coming on and being our guest again. And
Yeah, anytime.
fingers
As you
crossed.
can tell, I'm not shy, so uh,
I
happy
appreciate
to
you
talk to you about anything.
posting on Reddit and like informing people there. I think it's really helpful, not just wherever. Um, at least as for me, I guess I'm too online, too online.
Yeah, no, I try to be out there as much as I can, and that's. I mean, if you don't like talking to people, you probably shouldn't be an elected official, right? So,
Yep. All right.
yeah.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
yeah. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and
Yeah.
we'll see where this goes. Got a few more weeks.
Yep. I'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.